Hi guys, in this video we're going to show you how to make a landscaped modular terrain tile from the base tile we made in our last video. I will demonstrate the techniques used on a variety of such tiles that I have made. This first tile shows the escarpment with river to one side and marsh on the other. The first thing we need to do is make a plan. Draw a plan of what you want on the tile. As said in our previous video, all rivers enter or leave a tile in the very center. So here I made a small template that I could mark onto the center of each tile to make sure that they always came out the same place and would therefore all line up with the same shape. This was then carefully cut out with a power jigsaw. I then cut out the shape of the river using a hot wire router tool along with its accompanying sled. This makes the process very easy and not messy, which it can be if you use a knife. When cutting polystyrene this way, do it in a ventilated area. In this case I'm working in my garage with the garage door open. To soften the cut edges, I then used a hot kitchen torch just to melt those edges away. Obviously do this in a ventilated area. For the marsh area, I went back to using the hot wire router tool without the sled this time, simply freehanding it along as I didn't need a uniform depth along the length of the marsh. I then softened the area with the kitchen torch again, just to get a smoother surface to the marsh area. The hill was made from polystyrene sheet and was initially roughly cut to shape, and then once we got it on the board we could then measure it and mark it out as we needed to trim it down to fit the desired location. I used a selection of hot wire tools to get this polystyrene sheet trimmed to shape. Once that main part of the hill was cut to shape, we then used a thinner sheet of poly for the lower starting point of the hill. I then marked a slope into the main part of the hill. And this was then cut out using a tabletop hot wire cutter. Once all the pieces were cut to shape, they were then glued into place with Gorilla Glue. This is the foaming brown polyurethane water activated glue we showed in the earlier video. Weights are used to keep it in place. While it was going off, I used some ready mix filler just to fill the gaps between the timber frame and the polystyrene sheet where the cutting had been done. To add the cliff features of the hillside, we then made some plaster cast rocks from rock moulds. There are various plasters you can use on the market. I just chose to use a regular plaster of Paris as it was relatively inexpensive. It can be quite heavy once set, but for the size of tiles I was using, I wasn't concerned about the weight. You can get a lightweight hydrocal from Woodland Scenics if you need a lighter weight casting. Follow the instructions of your plaster and pour it into the rock moulds. It can help to spray the moulds first with a little bit of water just to help the plaster enter all the nooks and crannies. There are a range of rock moulds on the market. These red ones are from Scenic Textures, and the black ones I will show in just a moment are from Woodland Scenics. They do a wide range of different types. Once the plaster has dried, you can remove it from the moulds, and in this case the larger pieces were broken up into small ones from the red moulds, whilst the Woodland Scenics rock pieces were popped out individually. A material that is transformed making landforms is modeling compound, or also known as sculptor mold. Again, various brands of the same thing. It is essentially a paper fiber material mixed with plaster of Paris, and once mixed with water in a roughly 50-50 ratio, you're looking at a consistency of sort of cottage cheese. Once it's mixed up like that, you can apply it with a trowel or whatever tool that you have, and it will instantly fill voids and such like, can be sculpted into forms, and also used to adhere these plaster rock moulds in place. So all around a wonderful material. The great thing about it is it sets really fast as well, about 20 minutes or so and it's done. Because of that, it's advisable only to make up a small batch at a time so you don't waste any material setting in the pot before you get to use it. Here I'm using it to make a small hill landform, which is actually the polystyrene cutout piece of the river we made earlier. I just tipped it upside down, stuck it into place, and now it's a hill. And here you can see how I'm using it to stick the rock mould castings to the side of the riverbank. And these are then further blended into the landform using more of the compound. The creek bed pieces can also be affixed in the same way. Back to our escarpment, and I've added cliff pieces to 3 sides and also a small extra piece of hilltop just to give it a little extra step and interest, and some boulders cast along that front edge too. This was all then blended together using more of the modelling compound. You can readily work it between the castings as a joint filler too. Some small hillocks were also made either side of the tile as well, using more of the compound and boulder moulds. Next I added some gravels alongside the cliff edges to look like fallen rocks and general scree and debris. These areas were first painted with PVA glue to glue the ballasts and gravels into place, and once that glue had dried, I then sealed the area on top with isopropyl alcohol first of all as a wetting agent sprayed on, and then some Woodland Scenics Scenic cement was dripped on with a dropper to seal the areas. Once that was dry, I gave those areas a quick whitewashing. Sorry I had not filmed that process, but you can see it later on in the video in other related areas. These are the sprayed sealing glues that you can use. Rather than actually painting the rock surfaces, we actually apply a series of washes, starting with a lighter tone and working up to darker tones. You can use the Woodland Scenics kit, or you can also just use some thinned acrylic paints. This process is sometimes known as leopard spotting, as you'll be able to see in the following depiction. We start with a pale yellow colour and work up through shades of brown until a darker brown is reached. These washes are readily absorbed by the plaster material. Once you're happy with the result and the washes have dried, you can then go on to the final black wash. The black wash will blend all these together and give a realistic rock surface. In this case, I'm using Vallejo's black dipping formula. This is quite thick, so it will need thinning down with some water. Once the black wash has dried, you can leave the rocks done if you wish, but I normally like to give it a light dry brushing with a light grey paint, just to give a highlight edge. Dry brushing is best done with a big soft brush. Army painter do a great set, but you can also just use a simple old blusher brush if you can get your hands on one from your nearest and dearest, or perhaps purchase one from your local pharmacy. This soft dry brushing I find just helps unify the rock surface. And that's our cliffs and rocks done. Next, I quickly paint all the white areas of the tile with a brown base acrylic paint. You can use a hobby paint, a DIY decorating paint, whatever works. A big brush for the large areas, and then switch to a smaller brush for the more detailed, hard to get at areas. Once this is dry, we're then going to add a brown material base to the riverbed. This mixture that we make can also be used to make your roads. It's a mixture of tile grout and tea leaves, phlox, or even dried soil. Mix it roughly 50-50 and then glue it into place by first putting down a layer of thinned down PVA glue, roughly 50-50 with water. It's best to work in small areas at a time so the PVA glue doesn't dry out before you sprinkle on your mixture. Work your way steadily across the board section by section until you're complete. Once this layer has fully dried, we're next going to add river gravel ballast to the riverbed. This gravel will be glued in place with a layer of PVA glue. The PVA glue will also help seal the base of the river and prevent the resin water we apply later from leaking through. Using a piece of kitchen towel, I then push the gravel down into the PVA to make sure it's bedded in. Once this layer has dried, it is then sealed by first applying a wetting agent layer of isopropyl alcohol via a spray and then dropping on Scenic cement, which is a thinned matte glue. Geek Gaming's Matt Sealant can also be used the same way. The isopropyl alcohol used first helps the glue penetrate through into the gravel layers, not just dry on top. We are now ready to grass flock our tile, and we're going to paint on an area of 50% PVA wood glue, thinned with water once again, to the areas where we want the grass, and sprinkle on a fine sponge flock material. This one is made by Scenic Textures and comes in large economy 5-litre bags. Wherever there are roads on your tile, don't paint those areas just yet. Work in small areas again so the PVA glue doesn't dry too fast, and I find applying the flock through a sieve helps apply it in a uniform flat manner rather than lumps and clumps. Once you've sprinkled it, obviously collect the excess to use later. Work your way around small areas where there are rocks protruding and such like with a smaller brush, but otherwise you can use a fairly large brush to get the glue on. Once this first mid-green grass layer has dried, I then add other colours. Along a riverbank like here, where I imagine there will be more lush foliage, I apply a darker flock. I also find a little dark flock sprinkled around the base of a hill can help define its edge. Contrastingly, on raised hilltops and such like, I will use a lighter yellow flock sparingly. Roads are added to our layouts with the same material that we used to first base the river, the brown mix of grout and soil or tea leaves or flock. Again, we paint the area of the roadway with thinned PVA wood glue, 50% water and glue, and then we'll sprinkle on our material. If you want your road to look worn into the landscape during the planning and cutting in stage, if you use your kitchen torch to first soften this area, it will just depress it a little into the polystyrene tile. Once that has dried, I then dab a little PVA down the centre of the road and dot in a few little bits of grass to give that sense of a trackway. With all our flocks now applied to the board, it's time to seal the board, and again here we're going to spray the entire board with isopropyl alcohol as a wetting agent, and then again either the Scenic cement from Woodland Scenics or the Geek Gaming Scenics Matt Sealant. Spray this in a good thick layer so it penetrates through all the flock layers and seals everything down. You will need to repeat this process about 3 times, giving it time to dry between layers. The advantage to using these branded products to do this sealing is that they dry matte. If you use thinned PVA to do the same thing, it can dry glossy. I did some earlier videos about making reeds on long grasses and tufts that you can add to your layouts, and here we're going to apply them to the layout. Bushes can easily be added to your layout using this layer material from Scenic Textures. Comes in a bag of 3 different colours of a sponge-like layer material which you can tear pieces off easily and stick into place with a dab of PVA glue. This material quickly became one of my firm favourites for its ease of use and effectiveness on the landscape. Contrasting different colours beside each other gives a convincing sense of different bushes growing together on the riverbank. Here I've also added some of the long grass tufts beside the bushes. You can just see them sticking out with the blob of glue that hasn't quite dried yet. The PVA glue on these areas will dry clear, but I usually just cover them up with a small grass tuft just to hide them further. These are the grass tufts we made in our earlier video with the Static King, and have the tacky base glue to them. They stick to the layout straight away without further glue. There are various ways to add water effects to your layouts. Because I am going to be pouring relatively deep pours for the streams and rivers, I'm using a Mega Pour product from Barnes, which is a deep cast. It's an epoxy product requiring the mixture of 2 parts. Check the directions to make sure you mix it properly, and once mixed you can add a staining agent to give it a proper watercolor. Here I'm using a liquid pigment olive brown. A few drops go a long way, so only add a couple of drops at a time and mix to see how it looks. Here I'm mixing it for the Moat, which is a self-contained tile, so color is okay in a one shot, but if you're going to be mixing batches for several connected tiles, you need to make sure you get the mix right each time so they blend together correctly. This was my first time using the product, hence the fingers crossed at the start. For our open-ended river tiles, we need to seal the ends so obviously the resin doesn't spill out, and here I'm using masking tape. I saw this performed by another YouTuber, I think it was Luke, who does the model railroad stuff. This did work, but it did bulge out very slightly, which required planing back the resin once it had fully cured. Not a major, but just a bit of a hassle. Obviously here I'm gluing the edges with hot glue just to make sure it doesn't leak. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend the masking tape again. I would get yourself some plastic, maybe some styrene sheet like from Evergreen Styrene, that would work pretty well, or some kind of acrylic sheet if you can get it. But for a one-off, this did work. It's just that with the river tiles needing to touch each other, the slight bulge left a gap, so it did need tidying up. Here I'm pouring the resin into the river and bridge section. Apologies, the camera angle wasn't the best. It was the only way I could line it up to get any kind of recording. Thankfully my wife Tracy is kindly helping me out here. She's holding some cardboard just so I don't get any drips on the bridge itself as I pour the resin along. She's a little darling. Thank you, darling. One thing to be aware of as well is as the resin dries, small bubbles can come to the surface and you need to get rid of these, otherwise they'll stay there. One way to do it is you can literally blow on it or huff on it with your breath and the carbon dioxide will pop the bubbles. Another way to do it is to use your kitchen torch again, or a lighter flame that you can get hold of. Again, just gently, carefully wave the flame over the surface of the resin and it will pop all the bubbles for you. To add water ripples to our layout, we can simply do this by stippling on some Mod Podge gloss. This is a sort of thick white glue-like material which will dry clear, but dry clear and glossy, and its thick quality allows you to stipple it up and it will keep its shape. So don't put it on too thick or it can dry somewhat opaque. You want a fairly thin layer, but just enough thickness to keep a little bit of detail in it. Spread the Mod Podge out with a old brush. Here I'm using an old makeup brush. I'll probably switch to a thinner, smaller brush just to get some detail work around those reeds. There we go. And once it's all spread out, you leave it to dry, and that's pretty much the job done. The tile is complete. There was one last little thing to do, and that was quite simply to paint the edges of the tiles brown. So that's your modular tiles done, ready to use on your tabletop for your next outing. Obviously these are countryside-like tiles, so they're going to suit maybe Ancients or World War II or something along those lines. But you can use similar principles to make science fiction terrain or other settings that you wish to have games on. It's all just using the appropriate modeling materials, and we'll perhaps demonstrate some of those techniques on other settings and tiles in the future for you. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something from it and got some ideas. We'd really appreciate it if you gave us a like, share and subscribe. It all helps the channel grow and helps us to do better things for you in the future. We have also launched a small basic Patreon, so if you're so inclined and wouldn't mind chipping us a couple of dollars, that will help us pay for material costs and equipment to keep these things going out for you. So yeah, have a look at that. There'll be a link in the description below. Once again, thanks very much. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.